Today I'm going to present Wiremock, which will help bringing readability and robustness to Algolia testing. So my name is Grégoire Paris. I am a staff software engineer at ManoMano, a marketplace for DIY and gardening products. Think Amazon, but French for DIY and gardening. I've been working at ManoMano for 7 years already, and when I arrived in the company, my first task was to help migrate from Elasticsearch to Algolia. Since then, I'm the main point of contact for Algolia when it comes to technical questions. Algolia has many customers, and we are one of the biggest ones. We have a lot of traffic with more than 1 billion queries per month to Algolia. We have 30 Algolia apps and 10 production apps that hold a catalog of 45 million products distributed among 5 countries and 2 markets, B2B and B2C. We have 210 million records in all indices, which means that we have a lot more than just product data. We are not only big, we are unusual. We have a team of data scientists that come up with very creative way of bending Algolia to their will. We are also the kind of client that likes to try new things, like the new Algolia API client or the new cloud architecture. We go the extra mile to find ways to monitor things that are not part of the usage API. And at some point, we even sponsored an open source project that allows us to terraform our Algolia applications. And in this presentation, I will try to show you something for which there is not much documentation: testing. So during the day, I work at ManoMano, but during the night, I put my open source hero cape and work on maintaining the Doctrine project, a collection of PHP libraries that deal with many things, prominently with databases. We are big on testing, and one of my co-maintainers, Sergey Morozov, wrote a guide on writing tests where he defines integration tests. Let us see what he has to say. So integration, also known as functional tests, are required when the behavior in the tests is dictated by the logic defined outside of the DBAL. The DBAL is a project we work on, one of the sub-projects anyway. So what's outside logic for the DBAL? Well, the DBAL is sensitive to different platforms, like PostgreSQL or MySQL, and different drivers like PDO or native drivers. And also, of course, when you write SQL queries, you want to check that you are using the right syntax. The only way to do that is to send it to an actual database. Let's try to find the same kind of outside logic when it comes to Algolia. First, we have the API client we are using. There can be several major versions of it, and when you migrate from v3 to v4, you want to run the tests and be confident that your rewrite still works. Also, at some point, Algolia introduced a new cloud-based architecture that is more scalable, where you can scale your indexing and searching services independently. So at some point, we migrated from the bare metal architecture, which was the legacy one, to the cloud architecture. And although it is mostly a drop-in replacement, some features were not supported. Having tests help catch the differences. Finally, and more importantly, it's good to be able to run a complex Algolia query, for instance, a multi-index search with rule contexts that trigger complex rules against the racing, to make sure we are using the right syntax and that the result returned by Algolia is really what we expect. Okay, so what do we need for integration tests? For PostgreSQL, it's easy. Just go on Docker Hub and pull the official image. For Algolia, though, I looked at Docker Hub and I cannot find some kind of mini Algolia I could run locally. It's a SaaS, after all. They are probably not going to risk somebody reverse engineering their product, so that makes sense. Let's call Wiremock to the rescue. Wiremock is a full-fledged application that can pretend to be any HTTP service. It comes with a record and playback features that allows to capture traffic going to a real service, such as Algolia, once, and then replay it many times after that. It's kind of a middle ground between using the real service and mocking it manually. Okay, so let's compare both approaches. If you are using the real Algolia, you're using a remote service, so you need the internet, and you need a good connection to the internet. With Wiremock Fake, you are using a local Docker image, so no need for internet. Then, when you are using the real Algolia, well, there can be outages, and if there is an incident, you still want your team to be able to work and possibly push code that fixes the incident without, which mitigates the incident, without having, without being blocked by your CI. So with Wiremock, you have deterministic tests, and you are going to be able to avoid this. Also, if you are using a real Algolia to write integration tests, you are going to have to clean after yourself, like remove indices you created. And if you run tests at the same time as another developer, you have to avoid collisions. You have to name your indices in a way that is unique to the test. If you use a local Wiremock fake, you don't have to do that. It's easy to reset. You just drop the container and you are fully isolated since it runs on your machine, so you don't have any collision issues. And finally, with a real Algolia, things can be a bit slow. Whereas with Wiremock, it can be fast after some tweaks that I will show you later. So this is how it looks. Whenever we call Algolia, Wiremock is going to record the requests and responses and produce so-called mapping files. There are JSON files that you can edit and allow my Wiremock to know what to answer to an incoming request. Well, let's go to the demo now. I'm going to unshare my screen and reshare it. Remove from studio. Okay, the font a bit bigger, you said? Okay, well, let's go. Yes, okay.
We're doing it live here.
Yes, it's live. So I have a tiny project, as you can see. It's in Golang. And what it does is it takes Algolia quick start guide and basically tests it. So right now, there's no Wiremock involved. And if we look at the dependency, we only see one, the Algolia search client v4. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. So we have a very simple function that looks in the environment to find a real Algolia app ID and a real Algolia API key. Then we have this index name, we have this record, we create a client with the app ID and API key, and then we save the record in Algolia. So here we are going to wait until Algolia is done, and that's it. But that's not everything there is in the quick start guide. In the quick start guide, there's also usage of the search API to retrieve the record. That's going to be in the test because I'm a backend developer and I do indexing. So searching is not part of the code I write, it's part of the tests I write. So here we are going to enable debug mode so that we see what happens. And then we are going to perform a very simple search. So here I'm doing a set settings to make sure that my record is going to be searchable. Here I clean up after myself because at first I'm going to be using a real Algolia. Then I call my code and then I do the search. Once I've done the search, I look at the hits, and if I have no hits, then it's a fail. Okay, so let's try to run this. This is the output of the debug mode. And as you can see, it's doing the same thing over and over. Here you have the settings. Here you have the creation of the test index. And quickly, we are doing the same thing over and over, which is checking if the task is finished. And we don't have the time to wait for it. So just trust me. In the end, it works. Now, let's add Wiremock in the mix. So let's take a look at my dependencies. I've added some dependencies. You can see that I've added test containers Go, which will allow me to spin up a Wiremock container. There is also this API client that will allow me to interact with Wiremock to set it in a record mode and to stop the recording. Here, it's very important to get the latest version because I contributed 2 methods that allowed to do this easily. And finally, there's an integration library which allows test containers to know about Wiremock. It's more convenient. Okay, so let's see how the test evolved. The main file did not evolve, but the test evolved a lot. Okay, so first, we have to spin up a container, and we are mounting a directory called test data here in the container. That's where Wiremock usually records the mapping files. Here we select a version of Wiremock that we found on Docker Hub. And here we retrieve the endpoint, the address, if you want, of Wiremock. Why? Because we are going to have to give it to the Algolia client. Here I'm still enable the debug mode. Here I'm creating a Wiremock client. And here I'm starting the recording. So it's ready to listen to anything I sent to the wire. Here is the tricky part. This is the creation of the Algolia client. And it's not as simple as before. This is the part that changed. You can see that instead of using the default host, I'm using the Wiremock host here that is held in this variable to tell Algolia to reach out for Wiremock instead of going to Algolia directly. And the rest of the test is unchanged apart from the stop recording, which is in a cleanup function. Okay, so if I run my test, it's going to be slightly different. We can still see the debug output, but now we can see that it started a container, a Wiremock container. Okay, and we still don't have time to look into this, but trust me, in the end, it works. So we are going to go to step 3. And here we can see the result of the recording, and we can see that there are a lot of files that correspond to the polling task. So if I look at one of them, small demo effect, we can see that it mostly says not published. And that's not very interesting to test, is it? Moreover, it's really not what I want to test. What I want to test is the indexing and the search. So what you can do here is just remove a lot of the files. And instead of taking a lot of time, it's going to be instant. So here you can see that it still takes a lot of time. And now if I go to step 4, we can see that I remove almost all mapping files. I only kept one task mapping file. It's the one that says published. So it's a bit of cheating, but now, as you can see, it's instant. Okay, great. So how did I do that? What did I change? Well, here I introduced a constant that I set called record that I set to false. And depending on that constant, I start the recording or not. So here I just ran the test not in record mode, in playback mode. I skipped this part entirely. And Wiremock reused the mapping files that I created to answer, and that's what made my test instant. Okay, now let's go to the final status of the code. because it was a bit long, but it can be refactored into several small functions, small helper functions. You can have many tests that talk to Algolia in your project, but you want not a lot of helpers. So here I have a helper to spin up a container. I have a helper to start the recording and stop it at the end. I have a helper to create a test client, so a client that is going to reach out to Wiremock. And finally, my test function is quite small. I would say it fits on one screen, but with the zooming, it doesn't. But it's not a lot of code, as you can see in the end. Moreover, what you can see is that I added extra assertions. Once you are in playback mode, nothing prevents you to add more assertions to check that the response is exactly like you mean it to be. Okay, so this is the end of this talk. I hope you learned a lot about integration tests and how they are still possible even when you are using a SaaS. I had a lot of struggles until I found the solution, and there is a lot more to talk about, and everything is detailed in a blog post that that is going to be posted in the chat right now. That's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Grégoire, for sharing. I love a good back-end talk. We get a lot of really kind of fun front-end stuff, but things are getting serious when someone jumps into Vi. That's for sure. So that's how I know I've got to take someone very seriously. We did have one question in the Q&A. Michael wanted to know if you ever use Postman API.
No, I don't. I'm the kind of guy that uses curl and JQ and JO, but I know Postman is good. But it's I live in the terminal, as you saw, so I don't use it.
Yeah, I think Postman's an excellent way if you're exploring an API or trying to understand how it all fits together. It's a really great way to start kind of stitching that stuff together. But I love that you're using sort of Dockerized components and things that can kind of run, can be quickly put together sort of in the back end. But again, if someone's using Vi, they're probably going to be reaching for that command line before they reach for a GUI. But this excellent presentation, I think in the chat, I saw that the 1 billion requests definitely resonated with folks. I think this is something that you have to think about with a lot of external APIs, and how do we rely on the API? Obviously, we don't have a Dockerized version of ours. So you can trust us to be up and running, but you also want to make sure that you're using us appropriately and that the results are consistent. And I think this is kind of a great approach for getting that. Excellent. Well, check out Grégoire's full post. There's a lot more to it than just what he showed today. And there's some really cool patterns in there. So really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me again. It was an honor, and I hope more folks start using integration tests with Algolia.
Absolutely. And we'll have to have you back to talk about some of your other secrets later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.